Hello, everybody. This is Aaron Abadili, Director of Marketing over at Crucible. And today we've got Alexandre Blanc, who is doing a great job posting content on LinkedIn and really adding to the cybersecurity community, but also a good amount of crossover in IT, and him having held a lot of director of IT type roles in the past, IT leadership. So, Alexandre, welcome to Crucible's podcast.
Hi, I'm happy to join. And as I told you offline, that's my first podcast ever, so that's quite of a challenge. we're gonna make it. We're gonna cover a nice topic, which is something I like. Speaking about the ransomware threat and the strategies against that. So that's gonna be amazing.
Yeah. And everybody listening, I was telling Alexandre before we fired off, he's built for podcasting. He's got a smile. He's excited about these topics. And, he's doing a great job building community on LinkedIn. And that's the idea of this, which is sharing ideas, making sure we understand definitions and fundamentals, because I'm not a technical person. And it's really easy to miss some of these fundamentals, which maybe brings us to the series of blogs you wrote just the fall of this year around a backup strategy against ransomware and threats.
Yeah, go ahead. That's right. I went on this one because there was so many news about ransomware and cities and organizations being hit by that I was sometimes a bit annoyed seeing that the question was, should we pay or should we not pay? And we got all the recommendation around the official law enforcement, FBI, ANET, and which I understand from the investigation perspective. But then I was wondering, how come we even reached that point about wondering if we should pay or not? Where is the backup plan, the disaster recovery plan? How come we didn't schedule that? So when we spoke about this topic and get many comments on LinkedIn about that, I was being afraid a little bit that no one had good backup solution on that. And there's a lot of noise and everyone's like, yeah, but this is expensive. There is an overhead cost. And that was huge. So I decided to write something which could be used as a baseline, which is actually not very expensive to set up. So that was the original goal of that article, saying like, hey guys, there is a solution. See what you can do. It's not meant to be bulletproof stuff or a huge reference guide. And this is not suitable for everything. You have cloud setups and stuff. So I did focus on-prem, but obviously you can extend that stuff to any kind of configuration.
Yeah, like even the fundamentals still apply in cloud, that you some of the tactic and strategies for backups you may be applying on-prem as well. Yeah, that makes sense. And especially given your role, director of IT, I talk to a lot of businesses that don't have huge IT departments. They don't have huge security teams. And so on-prem is a way that a lot of folks do this stuff. They maybe haven't even attempted cloud yet, or certainly maybe it's more dabbling in cloud. It's not a cloud first strategy. So that makes sense. You wrote it in that way.
Yeah, that's right. This is a hybrid scenario most of the time. And while I was doing IT, this is something that the backup plan is a side job, like security and threat landscape on it is something you do on the side, because the operation hire you to make the IT work. And this is a day-to-day operation. So IT is mainly operation. And the backups, disaster recovery, evaluation of the risk, especially in SMBs, is something that we barely think about. Obviously, it's a trend that's changing. In the last 3 years, that's growing stuff.
Yes.
But we are still sticking to legacy setup, and obviously organization don't see from a strategical perspective the risk as very big, and everyone is thinking that it's going to hit someone else. So we don't allocate resources, and it falls back on the IT guys.
It falls back on the IT guys, even though a lot of times it's risk and a financial and a leadership strategic concern, which maybe that's a good way to start. Is some ransomware fundamentals, because prior to 2016, I do a lot of reading. I'm not in IT, but what I've gathered is ransomware was much different. Than 2016, we started seeing the hockey stick, and then from 2016 till today, late year 2019, moving into 2020, ransomware has transformed drastically in terms of how the criminal attackers are writing the malware, how it should behave, and some of their business objectives that they're trying to accomplish and how they're doing it to drive up ransoms and the ability for folks to pay. So let's start with some fundamentals there. Like, in your view, how has ransomware changed in the last 3 years? Where are we at today? And what do like directors of IT or CISOs or even CFOs need to understand about ransomware?
Yeah. What we saw like a couple of years ago, it was just a usual virus handling, and it was part of the IT operation. And mostly the impact was pretty localized, like reduced. You get an infected machine, you clean it. Most of the time, it's just the antivirus triggering an alert, this is clean. And if you're less or more cautious, some organization would just wipe a machine and start fresh to make sure there is nothing left on it. That was just a small scope of stuff. And also, it was not as spread as it is nowadays. What changed is that criminal organization behind ransomware realized how much money they could make out of it, and such a low risk is attached to it, because basically there is almost no cost to generate the attack. There is a high paying ratio on the back, and that's like the return of investment on a ransomware is crazy good. And this is sad, but this is what it is. So that's the change. And from the organization perspective as an IT, what was a disruption of one workstation, one employee or two employees or a couple of files is moving to a full organization production loss when this is happening, depending on the way you are set up and if you are ready or not to face such an attack.
Mm-hmm. When the malware is being targeted to an organization, once it's inside, it's written in a way that the attackers, the criminal attackers, don't have to manage much. There's a lot of automation happening behind the scenes in the way they're producing this ransomware. Can you dive into that a little bit more, just in your view?
That's right. This is an evolution from against a few years ago when we had some things that were called RAT, remote access trojan, which were usually viruses spreading on your system, but they were calling home all the time, having a controlled servers like C2 servers, and it was talking to them all the time. And this is because this was like used in botnet and denial of services attacks. And sometimes the encryption was a module of it. But right now, the whole modus operandi on that changed. This is now moving toward ransom only. And the thing is that detection of the attacks were actually focusing on the behavior analytics and the network flows. So the criminal organization, again, and the ransomware developers realized that they need some more quiet with a lower footprint viruses to be able to spread it within the organization. So they went like agile and came with automation in the process to get their ransomware once released, a fully autonomous virus that would spread laterally in your network without calling home. So that's a big change. Mm-hmm. It's not about having an army of botnet. It's about spreading inside. And because of the ransomware tactic, you get encrypted and you get a page that is telling you now you have to pay. That's the human who's going to call back to the attacker and say, okay, we want to pay. We need the decryption key, which they may not get anyway. But that's the way it evolved. Mm-hmm. I hope it's making it clear.
Yeah, it is. Well, and given that, that's probably what inspired your series of posts then, in helping organizations think about just a fundamental backup strategy and the way to do it right. Because I think what you kind of the premise and argument you made is you hate seeing when organizations are paying millions of dollars in ransom when the investment to do backups right is simply some technology, some process, and then of course like paying for some HR, whether it's training or whatever that might be. So that's a big change, is the ransomware is targeting backups. What are the 3 ways, because I know you wrote about this, what are the 3 ways that organizations should be configuring backups and be running constantly? Because we may not be doing that, but with ransomware, it's important we do this.
That's right. So something changed with the ransomware on the backup strategy. And I wrote that thing because this is pretty basic stuff. Already it was strange to see that some organizations don't even have backups. So first of all, you need backups for like regular loss of file, human error, and stuff like that. But now what changed is that not only you need backups, but you need to integrate this as your recovery strategy, which means that you need a backup online on your premises with accessible data. But the issue with that setup is that if the ransomware is smart enough to move laterally in your network, it's going to infect your backups too. And this is what happened in most organizations. They have their computers and the backup is on the side, and it's just basically keeping a copy of everything. But it's running on the network too, so it gets taken down by the ransomware too. So against this, first of all, we should have an off-site backup too. That's my second approach, which is not directly linked to the ransomware, but this is more into the disaster recovery plan. If you get a fire in your office and the server and the workstation burn, you need a copy of the backup. So that one should be off-site. So you basically split the risk. And then that's the off-site and online backup I speak about. And the third one, which came actually as a mandatory point following ransomware, is the offline backup. And that's a bit more tricky because unlike a regular backup server that you remain online and just run and you basically forget about it, which is kind of tricky because you still need to test the data and the restore, which we sometimes forget about. The offline one is basically a rotation scheme of the backups. It's kind of close to what we were used to do in archiving. But the archive was usually focused on critical like financial data, just a small pool of the data. With the ransomware in mind, we must have our full backup pool replicated offline. So basically, giving it depends on your risk appetite, but assuming that you may accept to lose like 2 weeks of data or production, then you can have a 2 weeks rotation scheme where you actually load your backups on an archiving system that you will take offline every 2 weeks and you rotate that stuff. Actually, depending on your organization, I like to keep everything and keep it either encrypted or in a safe. This is what I wrote in the article, to use it as an archive too. Because sometimes there are tricky stuff, like we spoke about time bombs and numeric time bomb in the systems. What you may not see is that the attack may have been started a while ago, and all your previous backups might be partially corrupted as well. During the investigation of such attack, you may or may not be able to spot the original point of entry of your infrastructure. So this is where all the versioning of the archive come handy, because then you can get back to the original untouched data and actually see where you can start over from. So that's pretty much the stuff. So basically, yeah, offline data is not touchable because the virus cannot reach it.
And I know, for example, Amazon Web Services, I'm not sure if Azure does, but AWS has something called Glacier that is their equivalent of offline backups. And if you're doing this on-prem, though, how do folks go about doing this? Is it literally just a server configuration that's on its own, plugged into the wall, that is effectively storage, and then it has some software that will help you recover that? How would an organization go about doing that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. On-prem, there are many ways to do that. Some IT guys are focused on tapes, which are good archive stuff. But in my own experience, but that's only me. Tapes are very fine, and this is highly recommended for a rotating scheme. On my side, given the cost of the hard drive storage and depending of your organization profile and the amount of data you have to store, sometime having hard drives, and you have quite big ones for cheap price right now, sometime mounting on a regular machine an encrypted volume made of big hard drives. We speak about drive of 14 terabytes each, and you span the volume on many of these, and you put on your data encrypted on these. This is sometimes really, really cheaper to do so rather than having a full rotation scheme with tape management and inventory software. And that is also something that I like to keep. That's my view on that. I consider the fact that we got infected by a ransomware. You come and everything is corrupted. So now we need to rebuild your backup. If you're on tape, you have to know the process to reinstalling the full management software, go through the indexing of your backups to be able to access your data. And this is something quite scary because in the past, I faced sometime integrity issue on backups. And when this is a linear recording on tape, it can make all your tape backups unavailable. It barely happens these days, but this is a scenario that, this is an overhead that you don't want to deal with in case of emergency. So on my side, I kind of like keeping a readable format. So I would take an encrypted drive, a pilot drive. Let's say even if you have 5 drives, it's 50 terabytes. You can store a lot of stuff on that. And the only thing you have to know is that you need to plug them in a regular machine, mount the volume, and you can browse. Then what you store in it, in my article, I speak about tools like Drive Snapshot and stuff like that. And it's your call. The way you take the data and archive it, it's your call. But you must think about the state of mind you're going to face when you get hit. You're going to be stressed.
Yeah.
You're going to be rushed. Basically, it's going to be such a mess that if you didn't prepare your communication plan, your recovery plan, you don't want to deal with some complex recovery process. So I like to keep the data as much readable as doable. So ideally, on your backup volume, you get the tools that allow you to restore the data. Because then you don't have to think about anything. Where are the CDs? Where do I download the software? Where is the license? You should not have to think about that when you are hit by a ransomware. Mm-hmm. So that's the strategy. Pack all you need, the data and the tools, in a volume that you keep on the side. And you apply a rotation scheme on that. Mm-hmm. If you are willing to spend the money on that, it might be even a good thing to keep these in a safe and keep these as archives. And because sometimes it can be also merged with compliance requirements. If you need to keep data on a certain amount of years, then you avoid to have a double process, and you merge the backup with the archiving.
Mm. And you bring up a good point too about just the change of storage and storage being so cheap. There are cheap ways we can get storage for our disaster recovery backup data that, you don't have to rely on tape, because we're trying to minimize downtime here. And you bring up a good point. You're in a hurry. You're rushed. You've got pressure from the business to restore things, and doing that through like a linear tape restore process isn't as easy as maybe, right sizing a more modern, storage solution for your backup, and then have the software that helps you manage that. That brings up a good point.
Yeah, that's right. The other point, you spoke about Glacier from AWS, which is a great solution to store the data. But again, if your main activity is on-prem, it's just an amount of data you store and you have to restore against your bandwidth capacity. Saving along the day of work, you get a little delta to push in the cloud on a daily basis. This is easy and fine. It's going to work. But if you got to restore the whole amount of data back to your on-prem setup, then there is a bandwidth and timeline consideration. How long it's going to take if you have to take 1 petabyte out of the cloud on-prem. That's something that is actually a real cost, because you lose operation. So X times salaries per day. This is the loss of exploitation that you have to cover. And when you store off-site, as I write in the article, I actually like to be able to reach the off-site location. So I like co-location for that as an example, because if you're really in a rush, and obviously the bandwidth, it's going to be a bottleneck. So basically, you should be able to reach physically your off-site location, and if need be, you pull the server out and you take it to the actual new offices or whatever, and you get full speed access to the data. Obviously, you have to be careful, because this is your only remaining set of data, so you don't want to break it.
Yes.
Or worst case, you can be a side-by-side with the server, duplicate on site, take a second server, storage unit, whatever, SAN, and this is the physical access to the data that I like. If you are only cloud-based, it's fine to be in the cloud, because you're going to have the pipe between your infrastructure and storage, and that's fine too. But if you consider your on-prem data, this is something you have to think about.
Mm-hmm. And maybe changing gears a tiny bit. I really like your point about co-location, because a lot of organizations are going to do that. That makes a ton of sense. You bring up a good point about building that pipe, and then that's done through software-defined means. And we can software define our networks in ways that, I hear folks say, well, ransomware and this type of malware is not a concern for me, because I've got antivirus and I'm able to, micro segment my environment. Surely there's no way this is going to navigate to my backups. What are your thoughts? I didn't prep you for that, but that idea just came up. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is oriented to a topic I do speak about, like a zero trust topic. Micro-segmentation is one of it. One of my friends speak about CDM, continuous diagnostic and mitigation. So if you have something like this in place, this is good. But we must consider the probability of the fact that the ransomware is designed to go through it. That's a risk assessment that you do. And it depends how confident you are on your process. And it depends on the access level of the entities and the different business unit you have. What I faced by my own experience, there is always someone or a group of individuals that need access to all the resources. Like, I don't know, you have an advanced engineer which moved to sales and need to be working in collaboration with the engineering department. And this guy, ideally, you would split sales laptop on the network segment, and they don't speak to anything else. But to do his work, this guy needs to access the data. So you cannot do the best practices. Therefore, you have still an open gap. So yes, if you have proper segmentation and you aim to lead to zero trust architecture, this is good. But you still need a backup process because you have to assume that things will go wrong. But this is part of your risk assessment. I mean, that's how far the lateral move can happen in your organization depending on your isolation process.
So I think I inferred it from what you just described, but give the definition of zero trust in a way, let's pretend I was a CEO and I didn't really understand it. How do you explain zero trust to people?
Okay, I have an article to cover that a little bit, but basically a zero trust approach is to remove any unknown part on your network and infrastructure. But that's a deep change, and the setting up that in a practical way needs some more examples right now in the market. Some brands are coming with solutions. This is a partial coverage of it. Basically, switch to everything is an object, and each object has attributes. And you have an access algorithm that defines if each item can communicate or access the other one. And this, combined with authentication and authorization check on a permanent basis, allows to verify the integrity of it. But I cannot come with an actual practical solution to explain it because obviously it involves network, file systems, and everything. So, but I mean, there are a couple of posts coming out of it, and the cloud provider come with nice implementation as well. But this is where we should go. I mean, micro segmentation is the way to go to limit the range and impacts of an actual infection. And obviously, business organization and culture must adapt to it too. I mean, the guy who needs access to everything, well, that cannot be done the way we did it so far.
Yeah. So, and that's why it makes sense with respect to the ransomware conversation, because zero trust fundamentals will, in theory, assuming we're following best practices, slow down the malware from automatically circumventing the environment. But like you said, there's always going to be exceptions. Therein lies the vulnerability.
That's right. Yeah. So this is managing exception and then applying counter mitigation against these. So in that situation, I mean, backups are still a good approach. I mean, offline backup will always be a good approach. You could as well implement this in the cloud. I mean, you can have a storage that you could commission, store your data and archive it and disconnect it. But then, I mean, this all fall back to the access control authentication of your processes. If you get your account and management account that are corrupted in the cloud and someone actually do a smart enough attack to get a human involved in the analysis of your infrastructure and take over this, it will be able to wipe all your stuff. So I sadly do like offline physical archive.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so the offline backups, what do you say to folks that talk about workstations? Because what you mentioned in your article is that, hey, I only need to focus on the data on my servers for backups. How do you frame that conversation with folks?
Yeah, that's totally right. If you get a numeric bomb like a ransomware affecting your infrastructure, it depends again of the business activity you have and the kind of network you have. if you have a standardized environment and all the workstations are the same, and there is nothing happening locally in the machine, this is fine. You don't need to focus on the backup of that. But in my experience, been working in software development companies, I get many different profile on workstations, and a lot of work is happening locally. Even if they work in a source control environment, they commit code in Git or SVN. There is always a delta between what's committed on a server and what's laying on the workstation. And sometime in long projects, it could be up to months. And I know it's a bad practices, but you cannot be in the back on each and every person in the organization. So on my side, I took the choice to back up everything. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, as soon as you have an exclusion, we will always fall in a situation when the exclusion, we forgot something. And that something might be business critical data. The second point is if you got hit by a ransomware and you actually have to rebuild your infrastructure, it's much faster and brainless activity to take the images of workstation and pull them back, even if they are 4 months old.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the amount of tweak you do for each and every user, little add-on, and what make their life, comfortable and keep up their productivity, you don't want to deal with that in a recovery process. So ideally, I would keep workstation images as well. So as it just, we don't think about it. Machine X, take the X image, even if it's 4 months old, don't care. Restore, and from there, the automation process, update process will take over, and people are going to be able to work. And your IT basically have a documented process to restore. Take image, restore on drive, put the machine, and that's it. It's not like, how do I install? The guy who did that setup is no longer in the company. We have so many legacy, custom personalization of the systems. And because there is a high turnover in IT, part of the culture is not always in the company. Documentation is not always optimal or up to date. And obviously, the ransomware stuff will happen at the worst time. You were about to document everything. You just migrated, and you're going to be it at that time. So if you have images of everything, this is much more easy because your base documentation doesn't need many updates. You have full backups of the system. Fine. I know this is space, but storage space today is very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
and like we talked about, with storage space being cheap, you can take some of the backup and disaster recovery sort of storage volumes offline that you described, and in a way that with speed, we're doing less impact on productivity and helping folks get back up and running because we've backed up their workstations. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's right. You need to design a proper schedule on that, because if you have some solver running on workstation that run like a couple of day work, the engineer or the people working the workstation are going to complain of the slowdown due to the backups. So you have to adjust that according to them. But it doesn't have to be on the workstation, as I said, an everyday job. I like to keep the shorter time as doable because development is critical, it's embedded and dynamic between teams. So if we miss one machine, it can be a big issue. But for most businesses, they can actually schedule a monthly full backup and 3 or 4 incrementals. That's good enough, and that will allow them to revive the systems. And the only daily backups you need is the critical data. But then, against ransomware, this is what matters. You don't want to lose productivity. The cost in the ransomware, one of the biggest costs is your employees being paid while not working. And
because you can't fire them while IT and security and leadership fix the whatever's causing the downtime, whether it's pay the ransom, not pay the ransom, restore backups, decrypt, what have you.
Exactly. So we want them able to get a solution to work and do something and respond to customers as much as doable on a shorter delay as possible.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just holistically, not just looking at the technology piece, risk management as a whole, and cyber risk insurance and some of the other process oriented things. Let's say folks do get hit with ransomware. It'd be nice if you had cyber risk insurance in place, for example, that will help you pay the ransom. Otherwise, that's coming out of your pocket, assuming you were in compliant with whatever the policy said, as well as having this disaster recovery, not just technology but process. How do you think about cyber risk insurance as a IT person moving to more of a security focus in your career?
Well, this is good and bad. This
Mm-hmm.
is good because this is part of the compensation measure that you can get. Point is that it's not always aligned to reality, and so there are 2 points. It's not gonna make you escape from the work you have to do. So you still, even if you have an insurance, you still need the IT, the skill, and the time to restore the infrastructure. Even if you get the money, this is a work to do, and sometime it might be very complex to achieve. So the second point is that the cyber insurance is also a nice makes you a target. I mean, we saw now a trend in targeted attacks where organizations having a high insurance coverage are a nice target because from the criminal organization perspective, these guys are going to pay. So this is a high value target. So if you are totally covered, they're going to hit you because they know you're going to pay. So the first time they're going to pay. And then you put the decryption key. It may or may not work because that's a fun part. You pay the ransom and you don't get the key. So what happened next? So you still need backups.
You still need backups, even if you paid and the key didn't work, because the IT team still has to handle that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and while you pay, even if the insurance is there, this is actually supporting criminal organization. And I'm well aligned on that point with many folks. I don't think we should pay. I mean, business and business leaders always compare cost vs cost. I mean, you pay 30,000 for the key vs 100,000 to restore. Makes no sense to restore. So they want to pay for the key. So that's one thing. But there is also the consideration of the technology world as a whole. We are not alone, and each organization that pay is actually financing criminal organization to get more development and smarter stuff. And nothing is going to say that you are not going to be hit the next week. Because when you pay, you don't actually fix the issue. You just temporarily maybe get access to your data. If you're smart enough, you're going to unplug everything and make backup of everything as soon as you have access to the data. But it's not a long-term solution. And it's only going to make that thing grow. The cost to produce and distribute ransomware is getting down. And we're going to get more of these. So at some point, the insurance, like when you have a disaster, we get a big fire in Canada, like last year or something, and all the insurance of home costs went up because you have to cover the risk. So as soon as this business is getting rolling, it will not be affordable anymore, or it will not be available at all.
So to feed it back to you, you're in the camp of, hey, as a broader IT and security community, when at all possible, we should really resist the urge to pay the ransoms, whether or not we have cyber risk insurance, because we're fueling the research and development of these criminal organizations targeting us. And you're also making yourself a target if you're publishing, or if they find out that you have cyber risk insurance, because they know you are funded to be able to pay this ransom. Yeah.
That's right. And if that becomes a standard and you get part of a compliance, and let's say the cyber insurance become part of a compliance, and to access that kind of market need to be compliant with that kind of certification, it's a public information. So it's like a nice list of target that you want to hit, because this one is compliant, they have the insurance, go. So it's kind of a bad approach. I mean, you should have an insurance to cover your exploitation loss. That's fine, but it should not be the only and ultimate compensation measure against ransomware, because this will not hold very long.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of disaster recovery and instant response, do you have any thoughts one way or another on decryption as a strategy for businesses?
Well, that's an amazing approach, decryption as a strategy. If you can get things properly set, to allow you to achieve this. This is good. It's a tricky part, and I mean, it's going to take specialists and that. I know a bunch of folk are working on such a solution, which is an amazing thing. And this is working because the ransomware attack type, there is a trade-off. There is a timeline of attack. So the encryption need to be achieved faster to be able to be efficient. And to be achieved faster, they cannot use complex ciphers and algorithm. It has to be like kind of weak algorithm, because otherwise it's too long and it's going to be detected and everything. So the footprint of the attack must remain low. And that's opening the market to people working on actually breaking the encryption. So if you get enough information before the attack, you might be able, between the delta of the non-encrypted file and encrypted file, to find the actual decryption key. And that might be a much cheaper approach, using the cloud capacity to compute a breaking algorithm, rather than relying on the whole other thing we spoke about. You still need backups.
Still, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But paying a ransom vs being ready and having an approach against that could be a great point.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a good point too, because using complex encryption has a bigger footprint, thus potentially triggering more alarms and stopping the full attack, which isn't yielding the desired outcome for criminals. So actually maybe what they're doing is some more lightweight type encryption that has speed, so they can impact the business more quickly, but it may be easier to decrypt in theory. So yeah, that brings up a good point.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah.
Well, I was going to say for you, maybe to wrap up today, if there are any top takeaways, let's say I'm a director of IT out there and I know I need to focus a little bit more on my offline backups. Maybe I don't have workstations backed up, or, I'm a executive, a CEO or something like that. And I'm trying to help my IT team understand, I want to give you the resources. We got to protect against this ransomware thing, and backups are a big strategy. What are like the biggest takeaways and any parting thoughts today?
Okay, the biggest point, if you have to do it, will be first, identify your key assets, key systems, key data, what is really critical to the organization. Because that's the best practice. Backing up everything is nice, but it might not be the critical stuff. So first, you spot the critical stuff, and then you get a plan for that. You get proper backup, offline backup, and a restoration, and actually a recovery plan that should be written. I mean, as stupid as it is, if your system and everything is numeric now, we got all SIP phones and stuff, and if you get it, you have no phone, you have no emails probably. And so you need as stupid as a phone list with all the key contact in it. And your actually written plan to the key data and system that you need to protect. That's a highly focus. And just apply at least on the rotation scheme I spoke about, and keeping offline data for this. If you can do that, that would be amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alexandre, thanks for taking the time today. I think you did a really good job your first podcast episode, and maybe it's because you sat with a marketer like me and asked some pretty basic questions, but I think you helped a lot of people today, because like we chatted about, there's that director of IT out there who is responsible for security and physical security and help desk and desktop support for the business, doing everything. And the backup strategy really rolls into the IT function, but crosses over into security and disaster recovery. So I think you bring some really cool insight to the topic. So you nailed it today for your first podcast.
Thank you. I was stressed as hell.
Well, hey, maybe it's inspiration to do a couple other ones, and keep doing a great job on LinkedIn. I know you're really helping the information security community.
Yeah.
Security and IT sort of marketers like me being able to read and follow your content and your perspectives, because, we see the black and white content from vendors, but it's nice to have opinions from folks who are in the trenches. You're doing it. You felt some of these things and the impact it's had on your team. So it was great today.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. I mean, I get so much information. I don't know it all, so feedback and exchange is an amazing way to learn for me.
Yeah. Very good. Well, and if folks want to find you, you're on LinkedIn.
That's right.
You want to throw out maybe the best places folks can track you down if they want to continue the conversation?
Well, that would be LinkedIn as the main point of contact. I'm not being very active on the other platform. All my posts are posted on Twitter too, but there is not a really not many followers on that side.
Yeah, very, very cool. I don't really use Twitter either, so I get it. But yeah, LinkedIn's phenomenal. So,
Yeah.
all right, very cool, Alexandre, and everybody else listening. Till next time, thank you so much.
Thank you.